At 4:30 a.m., Flight 672 hummed with quiet anticipation as it sat on the tarmac at Denver International. The early morning sky was a fragile wash of gray and pale gold, a silent witness to what was about to unfold. Inside the cabin, passengers shifted uneasily in their seats, rubbing sleepy eyes, scrolling through phones, or murmuring softly to companions. The gentle roar of the engines promised nothing more than a routine flight, or so everyone thought. Among the passengers, seemingly ordinary, was Captain Riley "Hawk" Donovan, blending seamlessly into the crowd. She wore casual clothes, a hoodie, jeans, and well-worn boots, but her posture betrayed the discipline of someone trained to respond when seconds meant lives. Riley's eyes scanned the cabin, taking in each face with an almost imperceptible calculation. The jittery man nervously fingering his briefcase, the elderly woman clutching a purse, the children pressed against the window, half asleep, unaware of the world's harsher realities. They were blissfully ignorant, and she needed them to remain that way for now. As the flight attendants moved down the aisle, issuing reassuring smiles and safety instructions, Riley's thoughts drifted. Memories of missions past surfaced unbidden. The midnight sorties over hostile territory, the precision maneuvers in Apache helicopters, the weight of responsibility when lives were stacked against the odds. She had faced danger many times, but never like this, never surrounded by ordinary people who expected only a smooth, uneventful flight. The engines rumbled louder. The plane began its taxi down the runway, the early sun reflecting off its wings like liquid silver. The passengers buckled in, some yawning, some already drifting back to sleep. Riley adjusted her seat, letting the familiar buzz of anticipation settle in her chest. Flight 672 was scheduled to cruise at 30,000 feet, a simple journey from Denver to Dallas, but something in the air felt off. Her instincts prickled, the invisible hair on the back of her neck standing at attention. Minutes into the flight, just as the cabin's hum became rhythmic and reassuring, a low chime came from the cockpit. The captain's voice sounded over the intercom, calm but edged with tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've encountered a technical anomaly. Please remain seated and brace for potential turbulence." The words, though measured, carried a subtle undercurrent that tightened the stomachs of every passenger. Riley's pulse quickened. She leaned forward, eyes narrowing. She had flown through emergencies countless times, but the tone of the captain's voice suggested more than a routine malfunction. Something about it was calculated, deliberate. She scanned the cabin, noting the nervous energy that suddenly rippled through the passengers. One man's phone vibrated, and he glanced down to see a flashing news alert. Unidentified aircraft detected near Flight 672's altitude. The screen illuminated his startled face, his hand trembling as he clutched the armrest. The murmurs of confusion spread. The elderly woman tightened her grip on her purse, whispering to herself. The children, half awake, sensed tension but couldn't name it. The cabin's usual symphony of chatter and engines had morphed into a quiet, pervasive anxiety. Riley exhaled slowly, forcing herself to remain composed. She was the only passenger who could respond beyond panic, the only one whose hands weren't tied by fear. The intercom crackled again. "Any combat pilots on board?" The words sliced through the cabin like a razor. Heads turned, eyes darting around in confusion. Several passengers exchanged bewildered looks, unsure if it was a joke, a mistake, or a plea for help. The question itself was surreal, a shock that seemed to freeze time mid-flight. Riley's chest tightened. She felt the familiar surge of adrenaline she hadn't experienced in years. Every muscle in her body hummed with readiness. The call sign Hawk, a name earned through decades of precision, courage, and survival in hostile skies, threatened to surface in her mind like an awakening storm. She clenched her fists beneath her hoodie, her knuckles whitening. The man across the aisle whispered to his companion, voice shaky, "Is this for real? Combat pilots, on a commercial flight?" His companion shrugged, but her eyes were wide with fear. Riley's gaze flicked toward the cockpit. The door remained closed, the pilot's expressions hidden, yet she could sense the tension emanating through the thin walls. They were counting on anyone to act. Riley stood, her movements deliberate, controlled. She wasn't acting out of ego or desire for recognition. This was instinct. Her voice, calm but assertive, broke the anxious murmurs. "I'm a pilot. I can help." The words floated in the cabin, heavier than she expected. Eyes snapped toward her, the collective realization dawning that one passenger might hold the key to everyone's survival. The captain's voice crackled again, this time over a direct cockpit-to-cabin channel. "Are you serious? Can you assist? We don't know if this is just a mechanical issue or—" His voice trailed, the implication clear. The radar signals weren't ordinary, the anomaly wasn't just a glitch. Something, or someone, was watching Flight 672. Riley's mind raced. She instinctively ran through possibilities: engine failure, emergency landing, evasive maneuvers. Each option had lethal stakes. Every decision she made could tip the scales between life and death for 174 souls. She imagined the weight of those lives pressing down on her shoulders, her heart hammering with a mixture of fear, focus, and the old thrill of mission-driven clarity. A sudden vibration ran through the plane, subtle but distinct, unlike ordinary turbulence. Riley's eyes narrowed. Her instincts screamed that this was not a random anomaly. The plane's systems blinked warning lights, and a low alarm buzzed, a sound she recognized from her combat missions as the prelude to danger. The aircraft was in distress, but so far stable. For now. Her eyes swept the cabin again. Fear radiated from every face, but panic could be managed. Riley reached down into her bag, pulling out a small notebook filled with hand-sketched diagrams of emergency procedures. Her mind was already mapping out the flight path, angles for a potential glide, sequences for engine stabilization. The room felt impossibly small, the air thick with tension, yet her focus sharpened to a single point. She had to act. Then over the intercom, the captain's words came again. "Any combat pilots on board?" This time, the repetition added weight, urgency, a call to arms. The entire cabin seemed suspended, waiting for anyone to step forward. Riley's jaw tightened. She could feel the gravity of the moment pressing down on her. This wasn't a drill. This was real, and the lives of 174 people were dangling by the thread of her next move. She inhaled deeply, letting the calm precision she had cultivated over decades wash over her. "Hawk," she whispered, almost to herself. Not a name, but a promise. And as the engines hummed and the alarms continued their insistent song, Riley's eyes hardened. This was her element, even at 30,000 feet over unfamiliar skis. She would not fail, not today, not ever. The cabin remained frozen, breaths held collectively, as if the entire plane had recognized the gravity of her presence. And somewhere in the distance, over the roar of engines and the muted chatter, the invisible thread of destiny tightened. A moment hung in the air, charged with suspense, as the captain finally said, voice low and trembling slightly, "If you're serious, please, we need you." Riley straightened fully, muscles coiled for action. Her hands flexed, ready to move, to take control, to turn fear into order. She glanced at the passengers one last time, their wide eyes reflecting hope and terror in equal measure. This flight had begun as ordinary, mundane, but that would end in a heartbeat. And above the clouds, the vast, silent expanse of the sky waited. The question hung in the air like a detonating fuse. Who was Hawk, and could she really save them all? The cabin of Flight 672 was tense, the low hum of the engines now a muted drum beneath the passengers' racing hearts. Eyes darted nervously toward Riley, who had just risen from her seat, her presence commanding attention without a word. The murmurs that had floated like uncertain whispers evaporated into silence, leaving only the sharp tang of fear and anticipation. "Captain, she says she can help," said the co-pilot, voice hesitant, almost unbelieving. The main pilot's hands clenched the controls. The intercom crackled again, the captain's voice cutting through the charged air. "If you're serious, step forward." Riley's jaw tightened. Her mind clicked into combat mode instantly, assessing every variable, every potential danger, every unknown factor. This was no longer a passenger flight. It was a high-stakes mission, and she was the only one trained for it. She moved toward the cockpit, each step measured, every eye in the cabin following her as if the moment itself were a collective held breath. Flight attendants glanced at each other, unsure whether to assist or step back, their professional smiles masking confusion and concern. Inside the cockpit, the scene was a whirlwind of blinking lights, alarm tones, and screens displaying engine metrics she had memorized long ago. The left engine was showing irregular pressure fluctuations, heat levels spiking in a way that defied simple explanation. The captain, a seasoned pilot with years of commercial experience, was tense but composed. His eyes, however, betrayed doubt. "Are you trained for this? Do you know what you're stepping into?" he asked, his tone cautious, almost pleading. Riley nodded, her voice calm but authoritative. "I've handled far worse than a malfunctioning engine on a commercial airliner. Let's stabilize this bird and keep everyone alive." The words seemed to carry weight. The captain exhaled slowly, a hand brushing a bead of sweat from his temple. "Then we'll follow your lead." Outside, the sky stretched endlessly, a mixture of dawn light and shadow, a canvas of beauty that seemed cruelly indifferent to the danger below. Riley's eyes flicked to the radar, then to the communications screen. Small blips moved in formation, fast, calculated. F-35s had been scrambled from a nearby Air Force base. The pilots, unaware of who was aboard Flight 672, were closing in. One wrong move could be disastrous, not just for Riley and the passengers, but for the intercepting jets. Riley gripped the side of the console, her mind racing through maneuvers she had drilled thousands of times. She could hear the low whine of the failing engine, a sound that seemed almost alive, warning her of imminent danger. She felt the familiar adrenaline pulse, the same feeling that had accompanied her through every high-stakes combat mission. Sharp, precise, almost addictive. "Radar shows unidentified signals following our trajectory," the captain said, his voice taut. "I don't know if it's hostile or something else." Riley's eyes narrowed. Someone is watching us. Someone is tracking Flight 672. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. She had dealt with interceptors, hostile aircraft, even surface-to-air threats before, but never in this context, surrounded by civilians, high above densely populated territory. Every decision now carried the weight of hundreds of lives. She took a deep breath, centering herself. "We need to maintain altitude and reduce stress on the left engine. If it fails completely, we'll have to glide to the nearest safe landing point. I can manage the maneuver, but I need complete cooperation from the crew." The co-pilot nodded. "You have it." Riley turned to the captain. "We need to inform the passengers, calm them, but don't incite panic. I'll take control here." She exhaled slowly, feeling the familiar surge of clarity. This was what she had trained for all her life. Assessment, rapid calculation, controlled execution under extreme pressure. Over the intercom, she spoke to the cabin, her voice steady, warm, commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your co-pilot speaking. We've encountered a technical issue, but I will be assisting the pilots to ensure we land safely. Please remain seated, keep your seatbelts fastened, and trust us. Everything will be fine." The effect was immediate. Nervous faces softened slightly, though the undercurrent of fear remained. A mother gently grasped her child's hand. A businessman exhaled shakily, trying to mask terror. Riley allowed herself no time to dwell on relief. Her attention snapped back to the cockpit. Outside, the F-35s closed in. One pilot's helmet reflected the sleek lines of Flight 672, and a crackle of recognition ran through the squadron's comms. "Hawk. Is that? No way, that's Hawk." Recognition sparked a flicker of hope and dread simultaneously. Hope that the intercepting pilots would cooperate, dread because now the stakes were personal. The pilots knew her legendary call sign, her reputation, but they didn't yet understand the fragility of the current situation. One misstep could be catastrophic. Riley's fingers danced over the controls. She guided the aircraft into a shallow climb to reduce pressure on the left engine. Every movement was precise, deliberate, honed from years of combat flying. She could feel the vibrations in the fuselage, the slight, almost imperceptible shudder of metal under strain. She ignored the fear coiling in her stomach. It was irrelevant. Skill and focus were what mattered now. "Altitude is holding," the captain said, relief threading his voice. "But engine temp is rising. We have a limited window." Riley nodded. "We can extend the glide by adjusting flaps and reducing weight on critical systems. We'll make it, just stay steady." Her mind raced. Flight 672 carried 174 passengers. Every decision now, every input, every command could mean life or death. She calculated approach angles, emergency protocols, and possible contingencies in real time. The sky outside was no longer just a backdrop. It was a theater of tension, each cloud a potential threat, each blip on the radar a question mark. The captain's voice broke her focus briefly. "Hawk, you really think we can do this?" Her eyes met his steady, unflinching. "Yes, trust me, follow my lead and keep your faith." A sudden jolt rocked the plane. Sparks flickered on the dashboard. The left engine emitted a high-pitched screech. Panic threatened to ripple through the cockpit, but Riley's hand remained steady, her mind laser-focused. The passengers were unaware of the exact peril. They saw only a momentary shake, the turbulence of high-altitude air. But in reality, every second was critical, a tightrope over life and death. "Adjusting glide path," Riley muttered, voice low, almost to herself. She felt the familiar thrill of being on the edge of impossible odds, the same adrenaline that had carried her through enemy fire, through desert nights lit by tracer rounds, through missions that had become legend among her squadron. The F-35 pilots adjusted formation, wings slicing through the crisp sky, mirroring Riley's every movement. Then over comms one spoke. "Hawk, follow our lead. You're cleared to glide. We'll escort." Her pulse surged, not from fear but from recognition. Her call sign had survived the years, still commanding respect in the highest echelons of American air power. And now she was back in the cockpit of a civilian aircraft, thousands of feet above the ground, lives in her hands, with F-35s providing protection. The plane lurched again. Riley's knuckles whitened. She was ready. This wasn't about heroics. It was about precise execution, survival, and saving every single life aboard Flight 672. She glanced at the captain, voice calm but sharp. "We start maneuvering in 30 seconds. Brace yourself." The cockpit fell silent. Outside, the early morning sky stretched infinitely, deceptively peaceful. But for Riley, the air was electric with danger, and the first move of this high-altitude ballet was about to begin. And above them, hidden in the sunlit expanse, an unmarked blip hovered, waiting. The passengers had no idea. Their ordinary flight had become extraordinary, teetering on the edge of legend. The question lingered. Could Hawk guide 174 souls safely through this peril, or was the shadow above them a prelude to disaster? The cockpit was a storm of blinking lights, alarm bells, and low hums from stressed avionics. Riley, Hawk, Donovan's hands moved over the controls with machine-like precision, adjusting throttles, rudders, and flaps as if conducting an orchestra where every note carried life or death consequences. The left engine, already strained, emitted a high-pitched whine that she could feel through the soles of her boots. Every vibration in the fuselage was amplified, every microsecond mattered. Outside, the morning sun glinted off clouds, scattering fractured beams of light across the wings and fuselage. It was serene, beautiful even, but Riley knew the calm was deceiving. The sky held no promises, only opportunity for disaster, and the unknown threat that lurked among the clouds amplified the risk tenfold. "Telemetry's spiking again," the captain said, voice taut. His hands hovered over controls, unsure whether to intervene or trust Riley's rapid adjustments. If the left engine goes, we lose altitude fast. I don't know if we can make it. Riley's jaw clenched. We will. I need precise coordination. Minor adjustments only. Do not overcompensate. She glanced at the radar screen. The unmarked blips, possibly hostile, possibly just curious military trackers, hovered at a dangerous proximity. One false move from any of them and Flight 672 could turn from an emergency landing into a catastrophe. The cabin below was quiet, almost eerily so. Passengers were pinned into their seats, holding fast to armrests, exchanging nervous glances. Children clutched parents, mothers whispered reassurances, businessmen muttered prayers into sleeves. The crew worked efficiently, calm on the surface but trembling beneath. No one knew the full scope of what Riley was dealing with up here, no one but her. Riley adjusted her headset, keyed the mic. Falcon lead, this is Hawk. Maintain formation but keep distance. I'm managing the glide. Her voice was calm, measured, each syllable deliberate. The F-35s mirrored her adjustments, forming a protective corridor as they moved in synchrony with her precise maneuvers. Understood, Hawk, the lead pilot replied. There was a pause, reverence barely hidden in the tone. We've got your 6. Riley's mind ran calculations at lightning speed. Wind currents, engine power, altitude loss, distance to the nearest runway glide angle. Every factor mattered and there was no room for error. She had flown Apache gunships in war zones, Apache helicopters strafing hostile targets while under fire, but this was different. These were innocent lives, ordinary civilians who had no idea that the sky had just become a battlefield. A sudden jolt rocked the plane. Seats rattled. Overhead bins shuddered. The engine emitted a sharp, metallic squeal, sending a chill down Riley's spine. She adjusted the throttle, stabilizing the aircraft's glide path, but the left engine's instability had grown worse. Sparks flickered on the panel. She felt the familiar knot of tension in her stomach, fear mixed with focus. Brace for turbulence, she warned the captain. Her voice was calm, but her eyes scanned every gauge, every fluctuation, every possibility. She had no time for hesitation. The plane pitched suddenly, a microburst throwing it violently upward before dropping it almost 10 feet in a heartbeat. Passengers screamed, bracing against seatbelts. A tray table flipped, spilling coffee across a man's lap. Children clung to parents, terrified, but Riley's voice over the intercom cut through the panic. Remain seated, follow instructions, we are in control. The calm authority of her tone was a lifeline. Even in terror, the human mind clung to order. She focused on the cockpit instruments, tiny shifts in altitude, airflow, and engine feedback guiding her every action. The left engine's temperature continued to climb, threatening failure. She had mere minutes to stabilize it or prepare for a full glide. Riley glanced at the radar. One F-35 had drifted closer than protocol allowed. She keyed the mic again. Falcon 1, maintain your vector. Too close and you'll disrupt our airflow. We cannot risk an accident in this altitude range. Copy that, Hawk, the pilot replied, adjusting formation. Even in the high-speed ballet of the air, respect for her authority was immediate. They had recognized her legendary call sign. That respect would save lives. A soft chime from the cockpit panel signaled a new warning. The left engine was beginning to emit irregular surges. Riley's pulse quickened, though she did not betray it. Her mind moved through scenarios. An engine failure at this altitude would drop them dangerously close to Denver's urban sprawl. She could attempt a glide, but precision was everything. Too steep and the fuselage could break, too shallow and they'd stall. Every second counted. She spoke quietly, almost to herself. Come on, steady, steady. The captain's voice, tight with tension, broke through. Riley, if we lose this engine, there's barely enough glide to make the nearest airfield. I know, she replied, we won't lose it. But even as she spoke the words, she felt the subtle tremor in the plane. a reminder that she was dancing on the knife's edge between life and death. Suddenly, a shadow passed over the wing. Riley's eyes snapped to the window. It was the F-35 formation glinting in the sunlight, but something was different. One jet had broken off slightly, observing more closely, scanning. Not hostile, but intense. Recognition didn't equal reassurance. She didn't know their intentions fully yet. The cabin shuddered again, stronger this time. Riley gritted her teeth, adjusting the flaps, rebalancing thrust. Sweat beaded on her forehead, her knuckles white as she guided the plane with absolute focus. This wasn't just about piloting skill. It was about mental endurance, emotional control, and trust. Trust in her abilities, trust in the co-pilot, and trust that the F-35 pilots would cooperate. "Altitude is holding, but engine pressure is rising," the captain said, voice strained. "We've got maybe 15 minutes before it's critical." Riley's eyes swept the cockpit one last time. The instruments, the flashing warnings, the radar blips, they were all pieces of a puzzle she had to solve in real time. She inhaled deeply, forcing her pulse to slow, channeling the adrenaline into controlled precision. "Falcon lead," she said, voice firm. "Keep formation tight but allow clearance for emergency maneuvers. I'm initiating controlled descent to reduce engine strain." A pause then overcomes the response. "Roger that, Hawk. We've got your 6, you own this sky." The words were both reassuring and weighty. Recognition, reputation, and expectation now converged. Her legendary call sign wasn't just a name, it was a promise and a challenge. Riley began adjusting the glide path, tilting slightly, easing the descent to maintain lift while reducing stress on the failing engine. Every micro-adjustment had to be perfect. Outside, clouds blurred past, golden sunlight piercing in shafts that momentarily illuminated the faces of passengers. Some eyes met hers through the small cockpit windows, unaware of who she really was, unaware that the lives they clung to depended on decades of training, split-second instincts, and unwavering courage. Another vibration surged through the fuselage. Sparks flickered on the engine console. The left engine was dying, screaming for release, threatening catastrophe with every heartbeat. Riley's lips pressed into a thin line. She had faced death before, in dusty deserts, in hostile skies, in war zones where the odds were against her, but never surrounded by innocents who had trusted her completely. "Captain," she said, voice calm, steady, yet sharp, "brace yourself. We may need to execute an emergency glide if the left engine fails entirely." The captain nodded, swallowing hard. "Understood." Riley exhaled slowly. This was the moment. High above Denver, amidst a formation of high-tech war machines, surrounded by civilians who had no idea their lives were in the hands of a single pilot, she began the delicate ballet that would define the rest of Flight 672. And somewhere beyond the clouds, the shadow that had lingered still waited, silent, watching, a presence that made every second even more urgent. The tension was absolute, the stakes enormous, and one question dominated every thought in the cockpit and the cabin alike. Could Hawk save them all? Riley's hands moved with calm precision, a blur over the cockpit controls. Every adjustment, rudder, throttle, flaps, was calculated down to the fraction of a degree. Her eyes flicked between the gauges, the radar, and the horizon outside the cockpit window. Flight 672 shuddered under the strain, every vibration and groan of the fuselage echoing the urgency of the situation. She had faced life-or-death moments before, but never with 174 passengers, innocent lives, hanging in the balance on a commercial airliner. "Captain, prepare for coordinated descent," Riley said, her voice steady, unwavering. She didn't allow panic to surface, not for a second. This was no longer a flight, it was a controlled crisis, and every decision now would determine the fate of everyone aboard. The captain's hands tightened over the controls, white-knuckled but trusting Riley implicitly. "I've got you," he said. "Just tell me what to do." Outside, the F-35s held formation, wings glinting in the sunlight. The lead pilot's voice crackled over the radio. "Hawk, we're with you. Maintain glide path. No sudden maneuvers." Recognition in their tone carried awe, respect, and trust. Her legendary call sign had preceded her across air bases and missions, and now it carried lives with it. Riley's mind raced through every potential emergency. The left engine had become increasingly unstable. Any wrong move could result in catastrophic failure. She adjusted the glide angle, easing the stress on the failing engine while maintaining altitude and airspeed. The aircraft shuddered violently, the fuselage groaning under the strain. Sparks flickered on the instrument panel. "Passengers," Riley said calmly over the intercom, "we are experiencing technical difficulties, but the flight crew is handling the situation. Please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts. We are under control." Her words provided a fragile sense of security. Children clutched parents, wide eyes glued to the windows. Adults exhaled, some whispering prayers. Every person in that cabin had unknowingly entrusted their lives to the precision of a pilot who had once navigated hostile skies thousands of miles away from home. Riley's eyes flicked back to the radar. One of the F-35s had drifted slightly off formation, scanning more intently. She felt the subtle tension of recognition. The pilots knew her call sign, but they didn't yet fully understand the fragility of Flight 672's situation. She had to manage not just the aircraft, but the expectations and movements of elite pilots trained for combat maneuvers. Her fingers moved over the throttle, easing back on the left engine while adjusting the aircraft's pitch to compensate for the decreasing lift. The plane responded, albeit with an anxious shudder. Riley's heartbeat matched the rhythm of the plane's vibrations. Time became a series of precise calculations, each second measured, each adjustment critical. "Falcon lead, maintain distance but stay aligned. I'll handle the glide," she said. Her voice was calm, authoritative, commanding. The lead pilot's response crackled through, reverent and taut with tension. "Roger, Hawk, we've got your 6, no interference." The words offered reassurance but reminded her that this wasn't just about piloting skill. It was about trust, teamwork, and human precision. Every micro-adjustment had consequences. Every second mattered. A sudden lurch threw Riley against the side of the cockpit. Sparks danced across the console. The left engine was screaming, threatening failure. She pushed back, forcing the aircraft into a shallower glide path, reducing stress while maintaining speed. Sweat ran down her brow. Her pulse was a controlled drumbeat in her ears. Panic was not an option, not for her, not now. "Captain, brace for turbulence," she warned. The plane jolted violently, the wings twisting against the wind. Passengers screamed. Overhead bins rattled, coffee spilled, but Riley's voice remained calm. "Remain seated, trust the crew." Outside, the F-35s mirrored her movements, forming a protective corridor. The lead pilot's silhouette was a glinting arrow in the sunlight. They recognized her. They trusted her. That recognition could mean life or death for everyone on Flight 672. The plane shuddered again. Sparks flickered on the instruments, warning of imminent failure. Riley's teeth clenched. She had seconds to make the right decision. Continue gliding and risk complete engine shutdown, or initiate an emergency descent to stabilize the aircraft. Her mind flashed through calculations: weight, lift, altitude, runway distance, wind currents, emergency protocols. Every decision had to be perfect. The co-pilot followed her instructions without hesitation. Together, they adjusted the flaps, fine-tuned the throttle, and guided the aircraft in a delicate dance between altitude loss and stability. The passengers had no idea how close they were to catastrophe. Children clung to parents, mothers whispered prayers, and businessmen muttered under their breath. No one knew the sheer precision, the decades of training, or the legendary reputation of the woman now piloting their lives. They only knew one thing: the plane was being held together by skill, courage, and instinct. Riley's eyes scanned the horizon. Denver's cityscape stretched below, golden morning light glinting off buildings. The airport runway was approaching, a tiny ribbon of asphalt, distant but achievable if she maintained control. She adjusted the glide path, the plane responding to her touch with delicate obedience. Falcon Lead were approaching Denver. "Prepare for final descent," she said. The F-35s adjusted formation, creating a corridor to guide the aircraft safely. Recognition turned into silent coordination. They weren't just observing, they were assisting, trusting her legendary call sign as if it were a shield. Then the left engine shuddered violently. Sparks flew across the panel. The warning alarms blared. Riley's pulse surged, but her movements remained precise. She had faced worse in combat zones, but never with so many innocents depending entirely on her hands. "Captain," she said, voice calm, unwavering, "brace yourself. We may lose the engine entirely. I need your full attention." The captain nodded, gripping the controls tightly. "Understood." Riley adjusted the throttle, eased the aircraft into a controlled glide, and began the delicate approach to the runway. Sparks flickered, the plane groaned, and passengers felt every vibration. But outside, the F-35s held formation, guiding them with a protective presence that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. A shadow passed over the wing, a reminder that recognition didn't equal safety. The unknown observer lingered beyond the clouds, a presence Riley could feel more than see. Every second counted. Every move had to be perfect. The plane shuddered violently once more. Riley's jaw tightened. She adjusted the glide path, maintaining lift while reducing stress. The runway approached faster now, a lifeline amidst the chaos. Every passenger on Flight 672 relied on her precision, experience, and courage. And in that suspended moment above 30,000 feet, Riley's legendary call sign was more than a name. It was a promise, a beacon, and the last hope for 174 lives hanging in balance. Riley gritted her teeth as the plane shuddered violently, the left engine groaning in protest. Sparks flickered on the instrument panel, and warning lights flashed in relentless urgency. The glide path she had carefully maintained was narrowing. Every fraction of a second counted. Every adjustment she made had to be precise. One miscalculation, one microsecond of delay, and Flight 672 could become a falling tomb for 174 people. "Captain, prepare for emergency descent," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "We're losing engine integrity. I need full control." The co-pilot nodded, eyes wide but steady. "Understood, I'll follow your lead." Passengers below sensed the subtle shift. The plane lurched, a ripple of panic running through the cabin. Mothers clutched children, fingers tightening around seatbelts, some whispering prayers. Businessmen stared rigidly forward, faces pale, eyes fixed on the seat in front of them. The sense of impending danger was palpable, thick in the air, yet Riley's calm tone over the intercom provided a fragile tether. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are descending to ensure your safety. Remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened. The crew and I are handling the situation," she said. Her voice carried the authority of experience, a blend of reassurance and command that demanded attention. Outside, the Denver skyline began to emerge, hazy and distant, stretching beneath a tapestry of golden clouds. The runway was visible, a narrow ribbon of asphalt that would determine life or death. Riley's eyes flicked between instruments, radar, and horizon in rapid succession. The F-35s, glinting in the morning sun, mirrored her every adjustment, forming a protective corridor that made the passengers' oblivion all the more surreal. The left engine shuddered again. Sparks shot across the panel. Riley's pulse raced, but her movements remained precise, deliberate, unwavering. She adjusted flaps, fine-tuned throttle input, and rebalanced weight, coaxing the aircraft to respond to her touch. Every second was a tightrope walk over disaster, and she had no margin for error. "Falcon Lead, adjust formation slightly. Keep safe distance but maintain coverage. We need space for final descent," she said. Her voice was calm, but her mind raced, calculating angles, wind speed, glide ratios, runway length, and urban obstacles below. "Copy, Hawk," the lead pilot responded. The words carried both respect and awe. Recognition of her legendary call sign was not just symbolic, it was operational. They trusted her judgment, and she needed that trust now more than ever. The plane pitched suddenly, turbulence slicing through the fuselage. Sparks flickered violently. Riley's hands danced over the controls, countering the shift while maintaining forward momentum. She could hear the strain of the failing engine, a high-pitched scream that threatened to drown out thought. She tuned it out, focusing entirely on precision, control, and the lives depending on her. "Captain," she said softly but firmly, "brace for possible engine failure at any moment. We may have to glide the rest of the way." The captain swallowed hard but nodded, gripping the controls. "I'm ready." Riley adjusted the descent angle, easing the plane downward while reducing stress on the engine. The glide was delicate, a controlled fall that required exact calculation. She monitored wind currents, adjusting rudder and ailerons in real time. Outside, the city approached, buildings shrinking beneath them, vehicles tiny as ants. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously, moments dragging like eternity, yet passing in a heartbeat. The passengers were unaware of the precise danger. They felt turbulence, the vibrations of a plane struggling against failure, yet they didn't know that their lives rested entirely on the skill of one pilot, recognized across the Air Force for feats that had earned her the call sign Hawk. A young boy pressed his forehead to the window, wide-eyed, whispering, "Are we going to be okay?" Riley caught the briefest glimpse of him as she scanned the instruments. Her stomach tightened, but she didn't allow emotion to cloud judgment. "Yes, we're going to be okay." She had to believe it, because the passengers were counting on her certainty, even if they couldn't understand it. The left engine's wail became sharper, more insistent. Riley adjusted the glide path further, easing stress while maintaining speed. Sparks danced across the panel. Smoke began curling faintly from the engine compartment. The plane shuddered violently again, a jolt that sent drinks spilling and hearts racing. "Everyone hold tight," she called over the intercom. Her voice was calm, direct, and authoritative, a lifeline amidst chaos. "We are descending safely. Trust the crew, trust me." The runway grew larger in the windshield, an oasis of asphalt amid the sprawling cityscape. But Denver's airspace was busy, and every maneuver had to account for altitude, wind shear, and nearby aircraft. Riley's calculations were relentless, flowing with the precision of a combat pilot under fire. The F-35s flanked them closely, forming a protective wedge. One pilot's reflection glimmered in her side window, eyes wide, helmet tilted slightly, scanning the aircraft with reverence and vigilance. Recognition had turned to coordination. They were now her partners in this ballet of survival. The plane shuddered again. Riley's pulse surged as the left engine emitted a final, high-pitched warning screech. Sparks burst from the panel. The engine was on the verge of complete failure. She adjusted throttle and rudder, coaxing the aircraft into a shallower glide, preserving lift while minimizing drag. The captain's voice trembled slightly. "We're too high for a direct landing if the engine goes completely." Riley's eyes narrowed. "We'll make it, I need focus, trust me." A violent gust rocked the aircraft, tossing it sideways, then down, then up again. Passengers screamed. Riley's hands were steady, orchestrating each micro-adjustment with absolute precision. Every fraction of movement mattered. Every second was life or death. "Falcon lead, maintain formation. Adjust for turbulence. We may need clearance for emergency glide," she called. The F-35s adjusted accordingly, a shimmering corridor of protection guiding Flight 672 toward the runway. Recognition, respect, and instinct converged in a synchronized dance of skill. Riley's legendary call sign wasn't just a name anymore. It was a symbol of survival, of leadership, of lives hanging by the thread of a single, steady hand. The plane lurched again, the left engine sputtering violently. Sparks danced across the console. Riley's teeth clenched. She adjusted flaps, eased throttle, rebalanced weight, coaxing the aircraft into a controlled descent. The runway approached rapidly, a lifeline just within reach. The passengers felt the turbulence, the jolts, the vibrations. But they did not know that they were moments away from being saved by a pilot whose name inspired awe across the Air Force. Riley glanced briefly at the captain. His face was pale, but his eyes held unwavering trust. She nodded once, a silent reassurance. "We're going to land safely. Stay with me." The plane descended, controlled, precise, guided by instinct, skill, and decades of experience. The runway grew larger, clearer, until every detail was visible. Markings, lights, the tarmac stretching out like a promise of survival. And then, just as the final approach began, Riley caught sight of movement beyond the clouds, a shadow, watching, lingering. Recognition had occurred, coordination had aligned, but the unknown remained. One last threat hung in the air, a silent reminder that the battle was not yet over. The question echoed, unspoken yet undeniable. Could Hawk guide Flight 672 to the runway, saving 174 lives, with danger still looming above? Riley's hands moved like extensions of her mind, precise, deliberate, unerring. The runway approached rapidly, a slender lifeline stretching across Denver International Airport, glimmering in the morning sun. Every second, every micro-adjustment mattered. The left engine groaned, sparks flickered across the console, and the fuselage trembled under the stress. Flight 672 carried 174 souls, everyone depending on her calm, her skill, and her legendary instincts. "Captain, keep your eyes on alignment," Riley instructed. Her voice was firm, steady, unwavering. "Flaps adjust gradually, throttle smoothly. We'll land this plane together." The co-pilot swallowed hard, nodding, hands following her directions with absolute precision. Outside, the F-35s maintained their protective wedge, forming a glimmering barrier that both reassured and awed. They didn't just recognize her, they respected her, trusted her, and now acted in perfect synchrony with her maneuvers. "Runway in sight," she called over the intercom, voice calm, yet carrying authority that reached every passenger. "We are making our approach. Please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts." In the cabin, the tension was electric. Mothers held children close, wide-eyed. Businessmen muttered prayers. Eyes followed the flight attendants' every move. No one knew the specifics, only that something extraordinary was happening above 30,000 feet. Riley adjusted the throttle, reducing speed carefully while keeping the glide path true. The plane responded with a delicate shudder, the left engine still whining in protest. Sparks erupted from the instrument panel, but she ignored the minor distractions, eyes fixed on the runway and instruments. "Falcon lead," she said over comms. "We're on final approach. Maintain formation, adjust slightly for turbulence, protect our six." The lead F-35 pilot responded, voice reverent, clipped. "Copy, Hawk, you own the sky." Riley exhaled slowly. Recognition of her legendary call sign was no longer symbolic, it was practical. These pilots trusted her to land a commercial airliner under extreme duress, and she would not fail. The plane descended steadily, each adjustment calculated with precision. The engines trembled, the fuselage groaned, and passengers clutched seats in anticipation, unaware of the orchestration of decades of combat experience guiding them safely. "Cabin secure?" Riley asked. "Yes," came the cabin crew's almost synchronous reply. "Good, prepare for touchdown." The runway stretched beneath them, seemingly impossibly narrow for the straining aircraft. Riley eased the throttle back further, reducing speed while ensuring the plane's nose stayed aligned with the center line. The co-pilot mirrored her commands, the engines responding just enough to maintain lift without overstraining the failing left engine. The plane lurched slightly as a gust of wind hit. Riley adjusted the rudder, compensating instantly, smoothing the descent path. She could see the runway lights stretching below, every marking clear in the morning sunlight. 174 lives were literally in her hands. Touchdown in 3, 2, 1. She murmured under her breath, co-pilot ready for final adjustments. The wheels met the asphalt with a controlled thud. Sparks from friction and uneven stress danced briefly on the landing gear. The fuselage shuddered. The left engine screamed one last time, and then, under Riley's expert control, the plane began its gradual deceleration. "Brake gently," she instructed. The co-pilot applied the controls, slowing the massive aircraft while maintaining perfect alignment. The F-35s flanked them, escorting Flight 672 as if it were the most precious cargo in the world. Passengers exhaled collectively, some crying, some whispering in disbelief. The plane rolled steadily to a halt, the engines finally stabilizing into a quivering hum of relief. Riley's hands moved one final time over the controls, ensuring full stop without overcorrection. The cabin erupted in murmurs, applause, and tears. Mothers hugged children tightly, business travelers wiped sweat and tears from their faces, and flight attendants exchanged looks of awe. Riley finally allowed herself a small exhale, scanning the instruments. She had done it. Against impossible odds, Flight 672 had landed safely, every soul aboard intact. Then came the unmistakable sound of F-35 intercept pilots over comms. "Hawk, that was incredible. I don't think I've ever seen precision like that in my life." Recognition, respect, and admiration radiated through the radio channel. The pilots had witnessed something legendary, something that validated every whisper of her call sign. For decades, she had been known as Hawk in military circles, a name synonymous with skill, courage, and calculated heroics. Now, she had proven it in the most unlikely of arenas, a civilian airliner in distress at 30,000 feet. Riley allowed herself a brief smile, though her focus remained, scanning the cabin, ensuring all systems were stable. She keyed the mic to the F-35s. "Thank you for the escort. Everyone on board is safe. We can taxi now." The lead pilot responded, almost reverently. "Hawk, you've just earned every ounce of respect we ever had. I don't think any of us will forget this day." In the cabin, the passengers began to realize the magnitude of what had just occurred. News of the technical emergency would flood the media, but few would know the truth. The life-or-death precision that had guided them safely, the orchestration of skill and experience that had preserved 174 lives. They only knew relief, safety, and the quiet awe that followed near-death moments. Riley allowed herself a brief glance around the cabin. Faces etched with fear had transformed into expressions of gratitude, disbelief, and overwhelming relief. A mother whispered, "Thank you for saving us." Riley's lips curled in a tight, exhausted smile. She didn't need accolades. The real reward was the safety of every passenger, the knowledge that her skills, honed over decades of combat and training, had saved lives once again. Outside, the F-35s broke formation, giving the commercial airliner space to taxi to the gate. One pilot lingered a moment longer, glinting in the sunlight. Over the comms, he spoke, voice almost breaking. "Hawk, you're a legend. Don't ever forget it." The words carried more weight than any official commendation could. They acknowledged not just her skill, but the courage it took to act decisively in a situation where hesitation meant disaster. As the plane finally reached the gate and the engines powered down, passengers erupted into applause, tears streaming, hands clapping on seats and some standing in sheer relief. Riley leaned back in her seat, exhaustion hitting her all at once. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes remained sharp, scanning for anything out of place. The shadow that had lingered above during the flight was gone. The unknown threat, whatever it had been, had passed. And in that fleeting moment of calm, Riley allowed herself to feel the depth of what had occurred. She had guided 174 lives through near-impossible odds, orchestrated a delicate coordination with elite F-35 pilots, and proved that her call sign was more than legend. It was living proof of precision, courage, and resolve. As passengers began to disembark, eyes wide, faces pale but smiling, Riley quietly gathered her belongings, slipping past the crowd unnoticed. She had done what needed to be done, and now, recognition would follow in its own time. The news would tell one story, the Air Force another, but only a few would truly understand the precision, focus, and courage required to save 174 lives at 30,000 feet. And somewhere above, the sun glinted off the empty sky, the clouds slowly drifting. The world had witnessed a quiet miracle, a test of skill, courage, and human endurance, led by a woman whose call sign still echoed in the ears of every F-35 pilot who had flown alongside her that morning. Riley exhaled one final time. She had lived up to the legend, and yet a small part of her already anticipated the next call, the next mission, the next impossible situation where her hands and instincts could make the difference between life and death. For now, though, she simply allowed herself to feel the weight of triumph, the satisfaction of precision, and the quiet, unspoken pride of a life saved. The cabin of Flight 672 was alive with a mixture of relief, disbelief, and awe. Passengers slowly rose from their seats, some embracing each other, others staring wide-eyed at the cockpit where the hero of the day still sat quietly. Riley Hawk Donovan leaned back in her seat, exhaustion heavy in her bones, but her mind was already scanning the instruments one last time, ensuring nothing was overlooked. She had brought 174 souls back from the edge of disaster, and now the world was beginning to notice. News crews swarmed the airport perimeter almost immediately. Passengers were interviewed, their voices trembling as they described the harrowing experience. Headlines began to form before Riley had even stepped onto the tarmac. Hero pilot saves 174 lives at 30,000 feet. Yet, few truly understood the precision, experience, and calm courage that had made survival possible. They saw the outcome, not the orchestration of decades of combat, practice, and instinct. Air Force personnel arrived quietly, escorted by airport authorities, their presence both reassuring and tense. The F-35 pilots who had escorted Flight 672 debriefed at the edge of the tarmac, still shaking their heads in disbelief. Hawk's call sign had preceded her through decades of military lore, but to witness her live in action, saving civilian lives in a commercial airliner crisis, was almost surreal. A tall, sharp-eyed Air Force colonel approached Riley, his expression a mixture of admiration and awe. "Hawk," he said, voice low but commanding, "you've just done something extraordinary. I don't think anyone outside your squadron could fully appreciate this." Riley offered a faint, tired smile. "Just doing my job, sir. Everyone's safe. That's what matters." The colonel shook his head. "No, this isn't just a job. This is legendary. You've taken a situation that could have ended in tragedy and executed with precision, skill, and absolute calm. Every F-35 pilot who flew with you this morning will remember this day forever." Meanwhile, the passengers filed out of the plane, their emotions raw. Mothers held children tightly, whispering gratitude. Elderly men and women grasped hands in relief. A businessman approached Riley, voice shaky but filled with awe. I don't even know your name, but thank you. You saved us." Hawk nodded, voice calm. "Just stay safe, that's all that matters." Media crews clamored closer, cameras flashing, microphones thrust toward her. She deflected questions with practiced neutrality, allowing the passengers' accounts to carry the story. The truth was simple. She had done her job, and she had done it with skill honed from years of combat missions, where lives depended on her split-second decisions every single day. Yet beneath the calm exterior, Riley felt the familiar pulse of adrenaline. The public had seen the outcome, but the real challenge, the precise calculations, the tension, the instant judgment calls, had remained invisible. Only the F-35 pilots, the co-pilot, and the Air Force observers truly grasped the magnitude of what had transpired. The lead F-35 pilot approached, helmet under his arm, eyes wide. "Hawk, I've flown with top-tier pilots, seen every maneuver imaginable, but what you did today, that was beyond anything I've witnessed. You didn't just save a plane, you orchestrated a miracle." Riley's eyes met his, steady and calm. It was teamwork. Everyone did their part. The pilot shook his head, voice low and reverent. "You were the linchpin. No one else could have done it like that. You're legendary, Hawk, and now the world is beginning to understand." Behind them, airport authorities cleared the way for passengers, who were slowly departing, still in awe. Riley moved quietly to the edge of the tarmac, watching as families reunited, tears of relief streaming down faces. Every expression reflected the gravity of what had been narrowly avoided. But the day was far from over. In the background, federal authorities, airline executives, and aviation safety investigators began converging. They would need to know what had happened, why it had happened, and how a civilian airliner had been guided to safety under extreme duress. Riley anticipated the questions: technical inquiries, procedural audits, and inevitable media scrutiny. She had faced intense debriefs before, combat zones, classified missions, and high-stakes operations. But this was different. Now, civilians had been directly involved. Her phone vibrated. A secure line, the caller ID flashing the Air Force emblem. Riley answered. "Hawk." The voice on the other end was sharp, formal, yet tinged with awe. "Riley, outstanding work. Everyone's talking about your call sign, your precision, calm under pressure, and execution. This is going to go down in history. The Pentagon wants a full report, but more importantly, they want you recognized." Riley's fingers tightened around the phone. Recognition was not what she sought, but she understood the gravity. Saving 174 lives had elevated her actions into legend. Her call sign, already revered in military circles, now carried weight in the public eye. "Understood," she replied, voice steady. "I'll provide the details." The public narrative had begun to form. Hero pilot saves Flight 672 in high-altitude emergency. Yet, what Riley knew, the invisible orchestration of precision, timing, and split-second decision-making, would remain behind closed doors, the stuff of classified debriefs and whispered accolades. The F-35 pilots lingered, unwilling to leave until the official clearance was given. They had witnessed firsthand what their radios had only hinted at. Hawk was more than a call sign. She was a master of survival, a living testament to skill, courage, and unflinching composure under life-or-death pressure. Riley finally allowed herself a brief moment of stillness, letting exhaustion wash over her. Her mind replayed the flight in rapid succession: turbulence, engine strain, the glide, the coordination with F-35 escorts, and the final landing. Every second had been a test, every maneuver a calculated risk. And now she had passed with precision. Yet even in triumph, Riley felt the pulse of the unknown. Something had shadowed Flight 672 during the entire ordeal, a presence that had watched, calculated, and lingered beyond the clouds. She hadn't seen it directly, hadn't identified it fully, but she felt it. A reminder that even in victory, the world held unseen dangers, waiting for the next test. Her gaze drifted skyward, scanning the horizon. For now the danger was gone, replaced by sunlight and calm. But instinct told her this was not the end. Recognition was fleeting, vigilance was eternal. Every mission, every flight, every call sign carried responsibility, and Hawk was no exception. Passengers began leaving the airport, some turning to glance back, a quiet reverence in their eyes for the pilot who had delivered them from disaster. The media buzzed around them, capturing reactions, snapping photographs, but Riley remained a figure of quiet focus. She had done her job. The rest, the accolades, the recognition, would follow. And then a soft comms signal, almost imperceptible, reached her headset. The F-35 lead pilot spoke, voice low and urgent. "Hawk, there's something on radar. We thought it cleared, but it's moving fast. Could be unrelated, but keep an eye." Riley's pulse quickened. Even in the aftermath, even after the landing, the shadow of the unknown lingered. The 174 lives were safe for now, but the air was never entirely secure. Vigilance, skill, and calm focus would be needed again. She had earned recognition, yes, but the real test, as always, was yet to come. She exhaled slowly, tightening her grip on the headset. Recognition was behind her, the passengers were safe, the media buzzed. But the shadow remained, silent, unseen, yet unmistakable. And Hawk had learned long ago, shadows in the sky are never truly gone. The terminal had quieted in the wake of Flight 672's emergency landing. Passengers had dispersed, leaving behind scattered luggage, whispered stories, and hearts still pounding from adrenaline. Yet Riley Donovan, Hawk, remained standing near the tarmac, her hands clasped loosely behind her back, surveying the runway and the sky beyond. Every muscle ached, every nerve still thrummed with residual tension, but her eyes were sharp, scanning, analyzing. Training and instinct didn't switch off. They never did. The F-35 Escorts hovered in a protective holding pattern overhead, engines whispering in the thin morning air. The radar signal the lead pilot had mentioned earlier persisted, a faint, moving blip, unpredictable, defying standard flight paths. It was distant, yes, but its sudden reappearance had everyone on alert. The unknown had not yet relinquished its hold. "Hawk," the lead pilot's voice crackled over comms, calm but firm. "That object is moving fast. Could be a UAV, could be atmospheric interference or something else. You need eyes on it." Riley adjusted her headset, scanning the sky through the cockpit windows she had left open to the morning. Sunlight glinted off cloud layers, streaking across Denver in bands of gold and gray. And then she saw it, a shadow, faint yet deliberate, moving in arcs no conventional aircraft could maintain. Her pulse surged, not fear, not panic, but the familiar thrill of challenge. Years in combat, thousands of flight hours, countless high-stakes decisions, all coalesced into this precise moment. Her mind raced, calculating speed, trajectory, potential threat assessment. The object was fast, erratic, intelligent in movement, and entirely unknown. "Co-pilot," she said softly, still calm despite adrenaline, "keep the systems active. We may need to assist in a follow-up maneuver if it approaches civilian airspace." The co-pilot nodded, his usual calm strengthened by trust. "Understood, keeping instruments ready." The F-35 formation adjusted, splitting slightly to bracket the moving blip, scanning, observing, preparing to react. Riley recognized the protocols immediately. They trusted her judgment, but the ultimate responsibility still rested with her. Then it moved suddenly, purposefully toward the city. Riley's mind ran scenarios at lightning speed. Could it be reconnaissance? A rogue drone? Something military? She didn't know, but she knew Flight 672 had just survived chaos. She would not allow another tragedy. "Hawk," Falcon lead spoke almost reverently, "we're in your hands. You call the moves." Riley inhaled, centering herself. Calm focus had always been her edge, her shield, and now it was all that stood between an unknown threat and Denver's unsuspecting population. She activated the airport's remote radar integration, overlaying live civilian and military traffic. The shadow was alone, no other aircraft near it, but it was accelerating. Its path was precise, almost calculated, almost intelligent. The instinct she had cultivated over decades screamed. It was testing her, testing humanity's limits. She had felt it before, every high-stakes combat mission, every hostile zone, every life depending on split-second decisions. And now, post-rescue, the world offered her one final test of the morning, the unknown. "Falcon lead," she said, voice steady, commanding. "We need to engage visually. Split formation, approach cautiously. I want a clean assessment before any action." The F-35s obeyed, elegant machines moving like synchronized predators through the thin air. Riley's fingers traced the glide controls of Flight 672, though she knew it would remain parked. The civilians had been safely removed. This was now tactical. Minutes stretched, a tense eternity. The shadow darted again, faster, closer, revealing subtle metallic glints. A machine of unknown design, likely unmanned, possibly experimental. No markings, no radio signals. Intelligence agencies would later confirm that it was a classified prototype UAV, lost from an experimental program. But for Riley and the F-35 pilots, it was a final adrenaline surge, a reminder that the skis were never fully tamed. "Confirmed," Riley said softly. "It's not hostile, monitoring. We maintain visual but hold position." A wave of relief passed through the comms channel. Falcon Lead laughed softly, a mixture of awe and exasperation. "Hawk, you just saved lives, landed 174 people, and now you're handling an unknown UAV like it's Tuesday morning." Riley allowed herself a small, exhausted smile. Training, experience, instinct, that's all. The F-35s moved back into standard patrol pattern. The shadow drifted away, harmless, its mysterious arcs vanishing behind distant clouds. The immediate threat was over. Riley exhaled deeply, tension finally ebbing from her muscles. Below, the passengers had begun to process the event. The media had already broadcast initial reports of the miracle landing, but now, through interviews, slowly, the truth of Hawk's extraordinary skill began to emerge. News anchors described a legendary pilot handling a complete engine failure, coordinating with top-tier military aircraft, and saving 174 lives in one breathtaking maneuver. The public began to grasp the enormity of her actions. Riley returned to the terminal, moving quietly among airport authorities, Air Force personnel, and the remaining F-35 pilots. Each face reflected awe, gratitude, and recognition. She had become more than a call sign. She had become a symbol of precision, courage, and unflinching resolve. The Air Force colonel approached again, his expression a mixture of pride and disbelief. "Riley, you've done something extraordinary, not just saving the passengers, everything. The coordination with military escorts, the calm under pressure, the near-impossible landing. You've set a new standard for aerial excellence. Today, you are a legend." Riley nodded quietly, the weight of exhaustion pressing down. "Just part of the job, sir. People are safe. That's what matters." But the truth was clear. Her legendary call sign now carried meaning far beyond combat zones. It had saved civilians. It had inspired awe. It had challenged the limits of human skill and composure. And in the shadows above, the mysterious UAV had reminded her, and the world, that vigilance, courage, and instinct were eternal companions in the sky. The F-35 lead pilot approached, removing his helmet, revealing a face marked by both adrenaline and reverence. "Hawk, you're extraordinary. Every pilot here has seen skill, but today was something else entirely. You've earned a place in aviation history." Riley allowed herself a brief, tired smile. "Thank you. Everyone did their part, but I appreciate it." A soft breeze ruffled the tarmac, carrying away the tension, the fear, and the adrenaline of the morning. Riley looked up one last time, eyes scanning the blue sky, golden sunlight glinting off distant clouds. She had faced chaos, navigated the impossible, and emerged victorious. And in that moment, surrounded by awestruck pilots, relieved passengers, and a city unaware of how close it had come to tragedy, Hawk's legendary call sign became more than a name. It became a story, a testament, a beacon of courage and precision that would echo through military halls, civilian airspace, and the hearts of those 174 people she had saved. She exhaled slowly, a faint, exhausted smile tugging at her lips. The skis were still vast, unpredictable, and occasionally threatening, but today they had bowed to skill, courage, and human resolve. Today, Hawk had saved lives, commanded respect, and solidified her place in history. And somewhere beyond the clouds the sun glinted, the wind carried whispers of legend, and the world began to understand that at 30,000 feet, amidst sparks, turbulence, and uncertainty, one pilot could change everything. Hawk had flown, survived, and saved, not just 174 lives, but the very essence of what it meant to command the skies.